this and change and modify your practice throughout the state, we've been embracing on what can we do around prevention and early intervention so that we're really working on that front end of the door. We've been working, if you were on last month's webinar, we've been working on the back end of the door, those kids who've been legally free, who are 16 to 18 years old and have not yet achieved legal permanence. So we've been focusing on those kids and those kids who have a goal of OPLA. And this month we're focusing on those kids who've been in out-of-home care for greater than 24 months. And so part of the backdrop that I'd like to share with you is some national data. And part of our national data looks like this. We've been, Mary and I have been back to DC recently, and you know, they've been looking at the trend of kids who've been in out-of-home care since 2001 all the way through 2011 around entries and exits. And it's just interesting that we as a nation have gone from, since 2001, for kids being in out-of-home care, we had peaked at 545,000 kids in out-of-home care in 2001. And we have since that time been on a steady decline. In 2006, nationally we were at around 505,000 kids in out-of-home care. And then in 2011, we dropped down to 401,000 kids in out-of-home care. And so how do we then look around exits? When we look at the exit data from a national standpoint, the exit data for 2001 showed that the nation was around 269,000 kids leaving out-of-home care. And then by 2011, they were at 245,000 kids annually leaving out-of-home care. And so we've steadily, as you know, seen a decline in the number of kids coming into out-of-home care nationally, and we continue to see a decline nationally. But I want to now focus on some information around, and what do the case plan goals for those kids who've been in out-of-home care look like? As we look at kids who are between the ages of 1 and 3, when that case is first coming in the system, the goal is for those kids, 61% of those kids' goal is to be reunified. 2% live with a relative. And you say, well, gosh, that's awful interesting that, you know, the relative piece is as low as that. 35% of those kids, the goal is adoption, and 2% is guardianship. And you must recognize that not all states have a relative guardianship assistance program. And then for kids who are between the ages of 4 and 8, their case plan goal has been 58% to reunify, a drastic shift. So here we were at 61%. You say, why is 61 a drastic shift from you? Well, these are still very young kids to me. And so those kids are not, 58% of those kids are, their goal is to reunify. Still 2% of those kids' goal is to live with a relative. 35% is adoption. 3%, now we've increased a little bit to guardianship. And we see that 1% of those kids is emancipation. For kids 4 to 8, it's hard for me to get my mind wrapped around that 1% of the kids would be, the goal would be emancipation. And then that 1% would be long-term foster care. And so we already are seeing for young kids under the age of 10 a shift about now we're embracing emancipation and long-term foster care. And so as we move on to the kids who are a little bit older, and we see for our 9 to 14-year-olds, we still see 52%. The goal is to reunify, 3% relative, 32% adoption. Here we're increasing the guardianship piece. 4% is guardianship, and 9% now is for foster care. And I realize that you don't have a slide that shows you the 9 to 14, and I'm about to, in a minute, talk about the 15 to 17-year-olds. But we will be posting or resending out the slides show to you so that you have that information before you. And so here we're seeing that guardianship is increasing. We're seeing that the use of long-term foster care. And that's where when we think about Colorado's piece of kids with the goal of OPLA, other planned permanent living arrangements, that's where those kids are falling into that. As we move into the 15 to 17-year-olds, we see a decline nationally in the number of kids who are being reunified. We do see here an increase of to 5% of the kids who are now moving with relatives. We see a decline nationally in the kids who are being adopted. This is at 10%. So we've moved from 32% kids being adopted to now being 10% of kids being adopted. For guardianship, we see an increase, slight increase. 5% of kids nationally are going to guardianship. 13% of the kids now are moving into emancipation. And so, and when we think about our kids who have the goal of OPLA and moving into emancipation, emancipating to what? And emancipating to whom is a concern that we have as a state been focused on. I know that when I say state, I don't mean just state child welfare, I mean all of us collectively. And so as we look at that last bullet, and I'm looking at it and you're going to get it eventually, that says, and 20% of those kids have moved into long-term foster care, that's their case plan goal. That it's disturbing that our case plan goals aren't having better permanent outcomes for our kids. And so you're going to hear, as I transition from speaking to some of our other partners on the here with me today speaking, you're going to hear about the Colorado data and what our culture now has begun, has been embracing over the over the last couple of years, and where we find ourselves and what we need to do about that. Mary? Okay.
They're not on mute.
Well, he just emailed me and said that she's on, but there's nothing, and she can't get on the online email.
Hi, can everyone on the phone hear me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, great. I think she has the wrong number.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, we're good.
Okay, great. Thank you. And so, Connie?
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Connie Behill. As Sharon said, I'm the Adoption Program Administrator. And you have on the screen now, hopefully, the OPLA culture that Colorado has sort of adopted. It was sort of shown in the slides that Sharon was providing, where the children and youth goals increase to emancipation and long-term foster care. And so typically in Colorado counties, the way that a child obtains the goal of OPLA is that he must be over the age of 16 with termination of parental rights, and he or she has significant developmental or physical disabilities or is medically fragile. His or her current caregivers state that they will be a forever resource for that youth. There are no plans for the youth to be adopted, give his relatives or kin guardianship, or return to his biological family. Let's see. When a youth has disabilities, the current caregivers are usually paid a very high foster care rate. The youth's caregiver, then when all this happens, the youth's caseworker goes to court and changes the youth's permanency goal to OPLA emancipation or OPLA long-term foster care. Usually when these situations have happened, no further resources are investigated through intensive family finding, recruitment through the various adoption websites, or case file mining to be able to see if there are other resources. Additionally, the youth is not asked about any kind of other permanent connections that might exist for him or help him to think about permanent connections. In either of these situations, there's no incentive. There is an incentive to not move forward with permanency outside of the child welfare system because the foster parents would take a great cut in pay when moving from foster care to adoption. And the youth would lose his ability to have the services that are provided through the developmental disabilities system for adults. And something that I hadn't really thought about as a caseworker over the years was if I had a youth that had had multiple placements and he finally was in a place where he could stay and they seemed to have a great relationship between all of them, I felt like I had finally made it. But when you really think about it, placement stability is still not permanency. That would be it.
So this is Mary Griffin, and I'm going to tag on to what Connie is talking about in terms of OPLA. Sorry, operator error. You're going to have to speak up.
Okay. What? Why permanency, placement stability is not permanency?
Just let them know what the question is.
Okay. The question was asking me to describe why placement stability is not permanency. Very often, foster families and the current caregivers for that child will say, we'll be a resource for this child forever, but they never make that final commitment to really making it a permanent legal situation. And so they stay in the system, and if the family changes their mind when the child turns 18, he still has no permanency. He just has a stable placement today.
Okay, and so we'll continue on. And I want to clarify that throughout the process, even though we aren't saying children and youth that have been in out-of-home care for longer than 24 months, that's the population that we're addressing today. So please keep that in mind. We've identified from folks that's a couple of the areas or a couple of the populations that county departments have difficulty achieving permanency for are sibling groups and then also older youth. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. In front of you, you have some data, and this data was pulled from Trails just this month. What this data shows is all of the children and youth that are in foster care by age group. And then when you see the check mark, those are the children and youth that have a goal of OPLA. Now what this sample excludes are 86 youth that are children or youth that are either on the run or that are in independent living. So if you look at this data, it really does follow a lot along with the national data. And if you and especially looking at, if you look at the difference between the 13 to 15-year-olds, and they're 19% with an OPLA goal, and then it jumps significantly at 16 and 17. And so in adding those numbers of 16 and 17-year-olds, there are nearly over 700 youth that are 16 and 17 in out-of-home care, and over 300 of those youth have a goal of OPLA. This next slide that you're looking at is the same population and where they live. And so again, if we go to the bottom, you can see that there's a prevalence of youth with OPLA goals in group homes, group centers, residential care, the congregate care. One of the things I find interesting about this slide is if you look at the very top number at the non-certified kin, we have 18 youth that have a goal of OPLA with non-certified kin. And I'm interested as we move on with your thoughts about why that's so low. Part of me thinks that it has to do with when the court awards allocation of parental responsibility, the case is closed. And so those youth would not be reflected. And then I want to point you to the number of children in kinship family foster care, which is significantly low. And then we have a significant number of youth with and possibly some children with OPLA goals that are in non-relative family foster care. So one of the things, I know that you are probably all aware of the National Resource Centers. They are organizations that contract with the Administration for Children, Youth, and Families. And there are approximately 10 now, and they all have specific types of content that they need to address. On the slide that you're seeing now, you will see the National Resource Center for Permanency and Family Connections listed. And that NRC is tasked with really looking at foster care, the components of foster care, looking at evidence-based practices, looking at cutting-edge practices, providing training. So I've listed a publication that they have available, and I would encourage you to use this to have your staff look at this, because it really, and to use it as a guide, because it's extremely helpful in helping older youth work through what some of those concerns and issues and worries are about permanency, and in fact, what does permanency mean to them, and what kinds of permanency are there, and you know, is it reunification? What does guardianship look like? What does adoption look like? And we all know that it's not a one-time conversation, that it's an ongoing conversation, and this particular publication really can provide some guidance in terms of working with youth, engaging families, engaging the foster families, the prospective guardians, the adoptive families, and especially the youth, so that they can maintain their identity. And in this publication, they're very thoughtful about reminding us that there's often resistance with youth when it comes to permanency. Part of it has to do with their developmental task to become more independent, and they therefore sometimes become a little bit oppositional. But being able to listen to them, to talk to them, to answer their questions about what different things means, what membership in the adoptive home, what membership in their family home would look like, in a guardianship home, is very, very helpful for them. And it's critical to really to help youth maintain their meaningful connections. And so it helps support their identity, and it's looking at helping them work through who have been important to them throughout their lives, today and in the past. And so looking at, you know, who is it that I really want to have a relationship with? Who do I want to continue having relationships with, and why? And how would I do that? And then looking in the past, who in the past do I want to reconnect with? And how am I going to do that, and why? And this ongoing conversation can really assist the youth in reconnecting, helping them feel more confident, and also helping you locate possible additional resources, either as permanent connections or as permanent placements. The slide that you're looking at now has yet another publication, and it's a recent publication from the NRC for Permanency and Family Connections. And it's related to siblings and foster care, and we all know how significant it is for siblings to be together, and what it means for them, and the trauma that occurs when children and youth are removed from homes, and then if they have to separate from their siblings, it can be pretty devastating. One of the things some of the information that's provided on this particular publication is research that's been done on what siblings are most likely to be placed together. And when you look at those items, it really makes sense. The smaller sibling groups are easier to place. Children and youth where there's not as much of there's not a big age gap, and part of that is probably their needs would be very similar. But one of the item that I found striking was that what their research shows, and part of this I believe is from the Child and Family Services reviews. What this research shows is that when children are removed and placed together on the same day, they are more likely to remain together throughout the placement, and that even up to 30 days, if there's a removal after that, that the likelihood is still very high that they can be placed together and that they will remain together. after that, the opportunities for them to be placed together and it becomes slimmer. And so that's really, I found that really interesting. And I'm going to be finishing very shortly. One of the things that we wonder about is, we know that all of you are really working hard towards permanency, and you all work really hard at trying to keep siblings together. And so what are your policies and processes that you have embedded in your work, and how does that play in with the practice model? How are you doing this with the practice model? Is there consistency in the practice? And the same would be as, again, these are the youth and children that have been in care longer than 24 months. As you're reassessing the youth and children, is this an ongoing practice, or does it happen once a year? And when you can't have siblings together, what's your practice in terms of having contact and visitation? There are federal requirements, but beyond that, what is it that you can do and that you are doing and that you can share with us that really helps maintain those sibling contacts? Because those are going to, siblings, family lasts forever. One of the other, I think, areas of practice that really seems to be bubbling to the top again is intensive family finding or diligent search. And what kinds of practices do you have that support that, and how is that happening? Is that, again, is that embedded in the practice, and rather than something that happens at the beginning of the case and every 6 months thereafter? You'll remember the screens that we had earlier, or I'm sorry, the slide earlier that talked about where these 723 youth with OPLA goals live. And we all rely on kinship support kinship families a great deal. And so my question is, what kinds of things are you doing to support kin so that they feel comfortable asking for services while their case is open with you, and they feel equally comfortable when the case is closed to ask you for services so that they can prevent another reentry into the system? And then finally, from the top down, what's your agency practice and policy around customer service in terms of recruiting homes for youth in foster care and siblings in foster care? We have foster care coordinator meetings 4 times a year regionally and 4 times a year in the metro area, and consistently the need for homes for youth and homes for sibling groups is a primary identified item. And so, having that agency support, having the customer service so that foster parents feel welcome and feel valued, and what kinds of activities and what do you do for the retention? Are you able to provide respite? And regardless of whether it's paid respite, what kinds of services can you provide them? Are you able and willing to pay a rate that will sustain the siblings and the youth to remain in that home until they achieve permanency, and however they're going to do that? And so I'm done, and I'm going to pass it on to Connie again.
So speaking of, are you willing to pay, as we all know, there usually is a financial disincentive for foster parents to become adoptive parents. Part of that is the whole mindset and the legal ramifications of adopting. You become the parent to that child. You're no longer a foster parent. So you should be providing, you as the adoptive parent should be providing for this child just the same as the children that were born to you. So that means that the reimbursement for foster care is not there. However, because Colorado has adoption assistance, we can assist with some of the special needs of the children being adopted. Let's see here. National statistics show that Colorado is either 42 from the top or 8 from the bottom in providing adoption assistance payments to families. And the same data shows that when a foster family decides to adopt, they're likely to take at least a 16 to 17% cut in their maintenance or reimbursement if they receive any kind of monetary assistance at all. Lots of our counties provide Medicaid only, especially for younger children who are being adopted. Counties and families agree that monthly monetary assistance is important, but the promise of ongoing support as the child matures, both occasional home care, specialized mental health treatment, or intensive in-home therapeutic intervention, and that kind of support to families is very reassuring to adoptive families.
So it was important for us as we were putting this webinar together to make sure that we were sharing lessons learned from one of your own. And so, as I said earlier, we have invited Pueblo County to participate with us today. And so our first part of their panel will be Tim Hart. And remember, he is the Child Welfare Administrator, one of the Child Welfare Administrators in Pueblo. Tim?
Thank you, Sharon. One of the things we wanted to do is we really, you've heard all kinds of data and all kinds of statistics and all those kind of things, and we wanted to talk about what our experience and what got us started. And it really, I think, is not one piece. I mean, one of the things that's clear to us is you don't do this work with long-term kids in a vacuum. It really is about changing the entire package, the entire culture of the program, from birth and intake all the way through permanency and adoption, and every family and every child. You have to consider that, because nothing you change becomes isolated in that way. So really for us, several things happened to get us started in this down this road. One of those is on the CFSR, where there was clear data. When we started looking at the data, we had to admit to ourselves that, yeah, there were areas we weren't doing as well or whatever else. We felt like we were failing these kids. These long-term kids were coming into our system. They were stuck in there for a long time. Just a couple years ago, we had Susan Kelly from Casey come down and do a talk, and I was pulling the data together. Our average kid that was on OPLA had been on OPLA for 7 years, and their average age of placement was 10 years old. And yet they were 17, 18 years old, and we were thinking, how long should it have taken us to find permanency? So the CFSR really drove us to looking at the data, and then we had to come to the place where you could look at it, admit it, and say, look, we're failing these kids, we really need to step up to this initiative. About the same time this was rolling out, our county started this journey down trying to understand cultural competency and cultural responsive practice. And we established a group of child welfare supervisors and caseworkers, and actually the administrators joined later in trying to understand how our children of color were getting treated and why there was such disparity and disproportionality in these long-term kids, as they were in other places in our system. But particularly as it relates to this is, again, we were not just failing this population, we were even at a higher rates failing our children of color. We also started with our courts best practice team in Pueblo County. Started about January of '09, after we were kind of organized and when we started looking. The very first meeting, our first conversation was about these kids, and saying is, we are failing these kids as a system, and as a system we need all the partners to step up to the table and participate and take the risk that are associated with changing our practice. One example was youth who had driver's license. Could they get that? And I remember having the conversation at our courts best practice team about the department signing for driver's license, and everybody was all okay with that. But what would happen the first time one of our 16, 17, or 18-year-old kids were hurt or even killed in a car accident? Would the guardian ad litem and all the attorneys step up and say, you know what, we understood the risk, like that risk of our own biological children, and we took that risk as a group and felt like we were there. It wasn't just a department issue, it was all of our issue. Rapunzel's going to talk a little more about the particulars about the court's best practice team, but our court, they were on board. The attorneys, the guardian ad litems, everybody was able to understand that, and partly because we could show them the data around that. And also the same time frame, there were a lot of state initiatives coming out. So again, we felt like we were taking these steps forward in partnership with the state and at the encouragement of the state and really felt like that was key. And some of those things I had written down was as you can tell, the state's increasing use of data and being able to name specific, go to case-specific kind of data and say this child is a child. Now, why are they doing this or why aren't they doing this? And then just the encouragement at the state level with the collaboration between the department and judicial, and really talking about how do we improve the process for everybody. For us, again, on our next slide, it was really all in the numbers. And one of the things we had to start with to change our practice was really engaging child welfare staff in the process, having honest discussions about what our outcomes were related to the kids with OPA goals. Some of how we initially did that is we sent around a survey to all of the caseworkers who had a child with an OPA goal and asked, what are the issues that you're seeing? One of the things that sticks out to me is it came back that 86% of these children or youth the caseworkers felt like had either severe mental health issues, were developmentally delayed, or had severe substance abuse issues. So from the very get-go, we understand that they were not easy kids, that it wasn't just that the system had tried to throw them away. It was literally the system wasn't being creative in finding the answers, but they had significant problems that we needed to address as we went forward. We created a position, a child welfare business analyst. I know not all counties can do that, but it was really our way of being able to pull the data so we could get down to the caseworker level and the child level to understand exactly what was happening and why and where the trends were and where we could address those things. Felt like we had already began, and this also then continued about the reduction of children in out-of-home placement and talking about their experiences of moves. One of the things I would tell you is if you were a child who entered Pueblo County services and you were in placement less than 12 months out of the large 10 counties, we were performing very well. Most of those majors we were 1 or 2, maybe 3 in a couple. But if you were in our system beyond 12 months, and God forbid beyond 24 months, our outcomes were dropping down to the 9th and the 10th of the large 10 counties. So we had begun to do that. And I think one of the things about OPLA kids are you have to address, again, this entire system. So you're trying to close the back door and find permanency for these kids before they age out. So the door is the aging out piece. But you also have to start looking at the front door and saying, how do we stop kids from ever getting into this boat? And that was part of that package that was impacting all of the programs from ever even getting into placement in the first place, let alone staying in the placement past 12 months. Part of our model was really is we needed to keep our kids local. It wasn't okay that we were taking our most vulnerable kids and understanding that 86% had these significant problems and shipping them all over the state hours and hours and hours from Pueblo at times where we couldn't interact with them on a regular basis. They couldn't interact with their family. The guardian ad litems weren't seeing them. Really nobody was around, so we started building some partnerships with our within the community to try to address that issue. One of those primary partnerships was El Pueblo, an adolescent treatment facility. So we developed a contract for non-residential services, and I'm proud to say we just got that passed by our new Board of County Commissioners the other day. It's for $260,000. And when the commissioners raised some eyebrows, as they should for that kind of money, I pointed out that we have over 30 kids less in TRCCFs than we did at the time, and those 30 kids equal about an expenditure of $180,000 a month. That made the $260,000 annually much more bearable. That was really a piece of our congregate care, and we continue to tackle that. And yet I would, to be honest, feel like we've kind of gotten stuck at this 25 to 30 mark. And so in the next 6 months, we really want to address that and, again, cut that number in half so we may have 15 kids in the congregate care at a time instead of 30. We did some significant things around diligent search. Like I believe most counties, up until then, caseworkers made efforts, but it was always in the gaps of their time. When they really didn't have much else to do, they might start looking and making a few phone calls and those things. But we felt like that wasn't good enough. And as everybody can admit, most child welfare caseworkers don't really have gaps in their time, or if they are, they're very infrequent, if they exist at all. So we did some restructuring so we could support the diligent search and family finding person, and then strategically made sure that that position was in the middle of the child welfare caseworkers, where the practice would start there but have this tendency it was spreading from the bottom up, as well as pressure from the caseworkers and the administrators and supervisors going down. Next on our list is Rapunzel 4.
I would like to begin by giving a special acknowledgement to our director, Jose Mondragon, who was very instrumental in facilitating and bringing together a team to establish our cultural competency best practice team in Pueblo County. This was truly important to our practice because understanding the needs of your families and your community increases your success rate and you're more successful. So in doing so, our cultural competency best practice team meets regularly on a monthly basis to provide quality training to the Child Welfare Division on how to be not just culturally competent, but culturally responsive, and understanding your family and the community and where individuals come from is going to only empower you to be able to support those families in their needs. Also, you learn from your families what it takes in order to help them to be more successful. We did put together a series of trainings which we have just begun to educate child welfare caseworkers on what culturally competency means. And we just began that process, but in doing so, we have noticed that there has been a shift, a more family-centered shift in our practice. We used our data to improve practice throughout the Child Welfare Division by bringing to the attention of the Child Welfare Division through quarterly trainings. We informed them about the outcomes that we were seeing, which were greatly improving as caseworkers became more confident about their families, understanding families' needs. So we engaged the people who are actually out there working with the families. We asked them for their input on how we can help them, give them the tools in order to work closer with families and identify what their needs are to be successful. Some of the things that we have incorporated in changing our practice have led into our permanency roundtables, such as when we implemented and began doing permanency roundtables in Pueblo County, we recognized that this training that we gave to the Child Welfare Division was very important, and also recognized in the permanency roundtable process that we needed to address cultural needs where we didn't see that already in the training that we had received. And finally, one of the things that we're doing now is we're really taking a close look at what does family engagement mean. And we know that the state is also taking a look at developing some type of a formalized process of measuring that. So we've used a lot of opportunities in order to gain training throughout the state and from talking with other counties, as we are now in the process of developing a family engagement model for our county. On the next slide, what I'll talk about is how all of those things have played into working with our court system. I believe this has been one of the greatest assets that Pueblo County has had in improving or influencing and impacting our practice in child welfare is by having as a partner our judicial court. We are very fortunate in that we have one judge who presides over all of our dependency and neglect cases, and that is Judge Eiler, who also has a commitment and a passion for finding permanency for youth. So this has certainly added to and made our work a lot easier. And the best way that I can give you an example of that is by our court best practice team. Back in 2009, as Tim mentioned, our court best practice team met, and it was established by Judge Eiler, who wanted there to be a large representation of those individuals who come to work with families involved in dependency and neglect cases. So she began by saying she would like a large representation of Department of Social Services staff at the table. Then she indicated she would like to have GAL represented, also respondent counsel represented, and other stakeholders such as CASA will be at the table. We have also invited, as part of our court best practice team, to have a foster parent representative and also youth representatives. And we've invited our large stakeholders who are our mental health center, Spanish Peaks Mental Health Center, as well as Crossroads, who provides our substance abuse treatment. By having all of these individuals come together once a month to talk solely about service needs for families has been great at informing one another about avenues in order to provide quality services for the people that we've served. And some of the things that have come out of our court best practice team that are very unique are such things as a Family Voice Conference. And those are conferences that are scheduled by the court for individuals to meet the county attorneys, the family members, and the caseworkers prior to development of a treatment plan to hear the voice of the family on what they think is necessary and needed in order to resolve the concerns that came to the attention of the court. This process has been very effective and supportive to getting through and expediting completion of court-approved treatment plans as well as accessing services for families. Another thing that our court best practice team did was we put together a dependency and neglect handbook, which is written in layman terms so that every family who is involved in the legal system can have a document before them to understand the processes that they're going to be going through as they're involved in court cases, and to understand how to get questions answered and how to have a voice in the process. The other thing that the court best practice team put together was a motivational video for families whose children have been removed from their care. And the title of the video speaks for itself, and it says, "You too can get your kids back." In this video, we portray actual families will speak about the legal process and how they were successful in getting their kids back once they came to the attention of the court. Our judge was very passionate about youth, and at the beginning of putting together the court best practice team, she asked what could be done to help youth and empower the youth that are in foster care so that we can find permanency for these youth. So this has always been at the center of a lot of our conversations when we meet monthly. The judge has invited CASA to put together more support groups for youth, and CASA has been able to expand services to include older youth, which is something that very few CASA organizations have focused on. So we're very fortunate in that regard. They've even recently applied for a grant and are now receiving funding to support a program that is known as Foster Futures Emancipation Skills, where while youth are learning emancipation and independent living skills, they're also receiving some monetary reward for their participation and involvement. Our judge also developed, and it was her desire to have a foster care Bill of Rights written in layman's terms so that the youth can know what their rights are when they're in foster care, and ask if the department could ensure that every foster home has visible foster care Bill of Rights. Also through our court best practice team, we began doing Family Reunification Day celebrations annually, and that has been a success in Pueblo County in acknowledging families for successful completion and getting through all of the dependency and neglect case process, which sometimes at the end we tell families when their case is nearing closure, that's it, you can go home now, but there's no celebration for all of their positive involvement. A lot of these things were initiated in Pueblo County due to several influencing factors. One of them was the Colorado practice model, which helped us focus on what our most successful outcomes are and what our areas are for needed improvement. We were encouraged by the Colorado practice model because they provided us with the training to develop a quality practice team. And that quality practice team has been our avenue for taking a closer look at what's going on in Pueblo County and how we can develop programs that are going to be successful by measuring the outcomes and studying the process of what we need to do to make those improvements. There were other initiatives that were going on throughout the state, and Pueblo County made sure that we were at the table at each one of these, mostly because they were concerning the need to find permanency for youth. One of those being the No Time to Lose initiative, the other Permanency by Design initiative, and then there's the 3-branch institute through judicial. We felt that it was the more knowledge that we were able to obtain, we could take back to our community to influence other practices that we had throughout the agency. And before I go on to, or turn it over to Suzette to talk about Permanency Roundtable, just yesterday I had an opportunity to meet with our Permanency Planning Unit, and I shared with them that I was going to be doing this webinar today and asked for their input on what caseworkers view to be some of the common things that we're doing in Pueblo County that they felt to have an influence in finding permanency for youth. And one of the things that came to forefront and came up repeatedly throughout our conversation was the need to empower and involve youth in the process, give them the voice, and then actually follow what they desire. One comment that was made was that the roundtable process has certainly given an opportunity and an avenue to do that. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Suzette.
Thanks, Rapunzel. Well, in Pueblo County, when we started, I was the caseworker, and they said, well, we have this new thing going on called Permanency Roundtables, and I said, oh, I want to know more. I want to get involved with that, and it really branched off. So as we started in Pueblo County in 2010, really learning about the Permanency Roundtable process, and so by January of 2011, we began doing Permanency Roundtables, and we started off pretty slow in our county. And part of the reason we started off slow is because we really wanted to get the buy-in from everybody, especially the caseworkers dealing with the kids with obligos, because that was going to affect them the most in their practice. And so we had to instill a sense of urgency and relentlessness as we were trying to figure out what these youths needed. And so we wanted them to really understand the process and how this was their opportunity to really, truly influence permanency in the youth's life, and not just make their placement the stability of permanency, but really permanency in their life. So we also wanted to prepare ourselves in this way by also including our communities. So with Casey Foundation, we knew that we were going to do a values training, and we knew that we really wanted to have our own stories when we presented that part. So in the autumn of 2011, Casey came down and they helped us host the values training, and we invited the entire Child Welfare Division, community service providers, county attorneys, defense attorneys, GAL, CASA, and the judge. And we felt that it was important to have our own stories, like I said, to share. So we chose 3 youth to start us off. 2 youth had an OPLA goal, and 1 youth had a return home goal. but had been in care for over 3 years. We also wanted to ensure that we kept the fidelity of the Permanency Roundtable process. So we did not want it to become just another staffing, and we really wanted our own caseworkers to understand this, and we wanted the stakeholders to understand this, that this was really going to truly be the difference. And this being the key issue, we wanted the youth to truly be the center focus and guiders of the Permanency Roundtable process. So we do follow-up updates until permanency is achieved with youth approximately every 45 days. So we're taking that fidelity of the program. We not only make sure we do the first roundtable, the second roundtable, but we continue to do follow-up roundtables until that permanency is achieved. And the next thing we do is we continue to train each other. So we call Train the Trainers, and we meet at least twice a year. So it's the group that's continually doing the roundtables, but then we ask stakeholders that we've also invited to be our external consultants to come in and just discuss the process to make sure that we're all continuing to realize what we're doing, keeping that fidelity up, changing, making adjustments to the model when necessary, but not changing the real big piece, which is the youth's voice. So we currently have roundtabled about 31 youth in our county. 7 have found legal permanency. 4 have found a permanent connection before emancipating. 2 youth emancipated before completion of the process. And we're still in various processes with 18 other cases. So that means we continually do updates. And when I say we do these updates, when we assign tasks to individuals in the roundtable, they're held accountable for the tasks that they are asked to do. So in those updates, they're asked to say, did you really find Uncle Sam for Joey? And then they have to give the report back on what they've done, whatever that task is. And from what I'm understanding from the youth is that's the piece that they love, because then they begin to trust us. They really know we're going to follow through. We're doing what they've asked us to do. So we plan on doing 25 new cases this year, and the success is really in the youth and allowing them to guide the process. The youth voice is the one that holds the most meaning, and once they start to open up, they really do appear to know what's best for them, who their connections are, and we become the tool in order to help make it happen. And I think Andrew's story really illustrates this the best, so I'm going to share the story of Andrew. Andrew was 15 years old and had been in care for 3 years with the goal of return home. He was presented to the PRT team as a youth who was resistive to completing his therapy, specifically his clarification piece regarding his sexualized behavior towards his sisters. Andrew had reportedly said that he was not interested in returning home to his mother and stepfather and felt safer in the therapeutic foster group home. Andrew agreed to participate in the Permanency Roundtable. He was a very articulate young man and appeared insightful regarding the situation, and he was open to the discussion of the Permanency Roundtable. He had invited his mother. However, she was unable to attend the first one due to health problems. The team was focused on options of permanency with his current situation and how to overcome some of the identified barriers and discussing diligent search. And as we were wrapping up that session with Andrew, the facilitator asking, oh, is there anything else that you'd like to see happen? And Andrew said, well, yeah, I want to know my father. And we put it all on breaks. It was like we were focusing only on his mother, his stepfather, and then here he comes and he says, yeah, what about my dad? I haven't seen him forever. And so we said, well, yeah, we'll follow up. And so our diligent search person got on it immediately. And to our astonishment, he only lived blocks away from Andrew's group home.
We could hire our diligent search person.
Yes, that's what the key, a lot of it is. It's very important. And so by the next roundtable update, we had introduced Andrew to his dad, Andrew had invited him to the update on his permanency roundtable along with his mother, which his mother and father hadn't seen each other for years because they didn't like each other. But within 11 months from the time we started the process, Andrew completed the therapeutic clarification piece. He formed a relationship with his father, with his stepmother. His parents, for the first time, are really working together in Andrew's best interest. Andrew did return home to his mother, but within 6 months, he was living with his father, and they no longer have involvement with us. And that one always gets me because it's that father piece, you know, that so often we forget to include our dads. And I think I just want to emphasize that piece more. So when we're talking to our youth, if they don't bring it up, we should also mention, what about your dad? Is there anybody else? And make sure that we're connecting them. And I think Rapunzel, when she sits in on those roundtables, I love it when she says, you know, we're really here to find that permanent connection. Could you tell us who that is? Just to be sure that that youth is also thinking, oh, okay, I get it. This is who I want you guys to know that's important to me. So that's what we do. So humps and bumps is our next slide. And when we started, I think the best thing that happened in Pueblo County was our child welfare administrators. They were committed to addressing and looking at what permanency means to these local youth and what we were doing that would influence permanent connections in the youth's life. They were also willing to ask and challenge all with when does permanency begin and discuss the fears when changes started to take place. Because when you're a caseworker for Oakland kids, you're pretty concerned when you start finding other options for them. What does this mean? And is this safe for them? And, oh, no, we can't do that. And really breaking down those kind of fears just amongst caseworkers themselves. So we had to look at those cultural issues within inside of our agency. So that apple doesn't fall far from the tree philosophy had to really be reframed. Caseworkers had to believe families can and do change, giving the family and youth a chance to decide what they need and what services would best work for them, opening the door to try again and not judging on past failures or blaming. Instead, starting over with new look of what can be done differently. So really challenging each other to open those doors. And you know, when the apple does fall, we get applesauce, and it tastes pretty good. So we get, you know, let's not forget that sometimes you can't use those same old philosophies. Caseworkers had to admit that the over-reliance of unnatural resources were not helping but causing more harm and not addressing the problems of permanency. Caseworkers were challenged to think outside that box, to listen to the youth and who they wanted in their life was the start of making the biggest change. Then putting services in place that promoted relationships, even in the most unusual connections. So even if parental rights were removed, remember that emotional thing was never severed. And so when they started talking about that they wanted to see their parents again, we had to be willing and open to look at that and see where those parents were and if we were able to maybe repair some of that relationship so this child could figure out what type of relationship that would be for them again. And even looking at teachers and mentors and coaches and who else might have been way important in this kid's life way back when. And it's amazing who they came up with and who they think about. And Uncle Sam, who may not have really been the uncle, but was the next door neighbor who came over and made sure they ate every day or did something for them. We needed to listen and we needed to try to find them. So again, that diligent search person really had their work cut out for them. And then we had to let those natural support systems that the youth had identified start moving the case forward. So the father's role became the starting place in every conversation. Questions were encouraged to be asked and not settling for, he left a long time ago, I don't know who he is, or he is abusive. Caseworkers were encouraged to dig deeper, find answers, talk to the father, the potential father, and never taking for granted again what somebody else said about the dad, but really finding out what was going on in that father's life and where he could be and where he could step up. And if paternity hadn't been done, to start doing paternity tests so these youth would know who their dads were. And I think there's 2 cases that I know of right off the top of my head. That one girl, she was 18, they had listed a dad on her birth certificate. Everybody knew he was not her father. Well, we found her biological father and at least gave her the opportunity to know who dad really was. She's gotten to know dad, and we've been able to go back, of course, because you're supposed to change who that legal father is on that birth certificate. So I think I just can't emphasize that more, that dads and the place of dads and the roles of dads are so important for these kids to know. We also were sitting in a round table, and we had 3 different names of 3 different dads, Seals, Fields, and something, something. And the diligent search person was right there, and she got on her internet on her phone, and she goes, I think I found him. And she did. And so we were able to also hook this girl up, get a paternity test done. Sure enough, he was the father. He was more than willing. And this young woman, she's been out to see her dad in Washington State twice now for the holidays. And so they're building upon meet her sisters and get to know some of that family for her. She doesn't want to move there, but she sure is glad to know him. And he's thrilled to death to know that this is true, that he thought he was the dad, and now he knows he really is the dad. The other thing was then we had to really look at our practice of setting up services and really knowing that we had to stop saying we're going to fix the family and that we knew best, but allowing the families to truly identify what their needs would be and know that parents really can and do change, and start taking ownership in our own role of not allowing them to identify for themselves what it is that could make their family work again. And so I think that's another thing, is giving that family that control and not thinking we're the experts, but knowing that that family is the expert in their case. The next thing was, safety as caseworker is always thrown in our face. It's the first, it's the middle, and it's the last thing you should ever think of. And not that it's not important, and I'm not saying that, it is. And it always will continue to be. But we have to take it one step further and do that same thing with permanency. And know that we have to think of that at the beginning of the case, in the middle of the case, and at the ending of the case. And if we don't have permanency, then there's no safety. And if we don't have safety, there's no permanency. And we're just starting to begin to address the well-being in that, because I think those 3 pieces are extremely important, because without one, you don't really have the other. And when we get that under our belt, I think we're going to see a real total shift in practices as caseworkers. Well, another thing we did with all these humps and bumps in our community is we had to get our stakeholders, the community involved, and let them take some responsibility too. I think as caseworkers we get criticized for not letting, you hear, oh, put them in residential. Oh, you put that kid in residential? Why did you do that? So you get it from both ends. The first, you didn't do it enough, or you're doing it too much. And so we had to let them, again, take some responsibility in these decision makings with us, and realizing that we've got to figure out better ways to deal with these youth and to develop criteria of why caseworkers can use residential care and why they can't, and what kind, and how is that going to make those permanent connections in this youth's life. If we use it, where is it going to be? And always keeping that on your forefront burner. And so numbers tell the story, and again, in Pueblo County, we weren't doing a very good job. Our minority children were overrepresented, and we had to really look at that. And so, through our best practice and our cultural issues were being addressed, we're not going to be confident at it, but we've got to start asking those questions. And so in our roundtables, that is one of the questions we ask. What are the cultural issues of the youth? Have we got it all in there? Are we addressing it the way the youth sees their culture, not the way we do? And just making sure we put that in. And then recruiting and maintaining the support of the foster homes for our older youth. Because what we noticed were foster parents are also getting really nervous. What are we going to do? Why is this youth leaving? And we didn't want them to sabotage any of the process, and we wanted to make sure that they knew that they had a role. And so a lot of times what we find is when we start reunifying these older youth, we really start looking at our foster parents and we ask them, can you become a coach for these grandparents that are going to take on this adolescent again in their home? What can you do? Can you help this aunt and uncle for us? Can you help us identify what you do in your home that makes it successful and give them ideas? And so we're trying very hard to implement that, showing foster parents where their role is going to be and helping them adjust to these youth returning home, or at least making these real tight connections with people that they find important, and they continue to support that. And I think the more we do that, the more our foster parents are right on board with us and are anxious to participate. And we have to also let our foster parents know, even if you're not invited to these permanency roundtables with the youth, don't get insulted. This is the youth's choice. And they can invite who they want, when they want, where they want, and it's okay. And we'll keep you informed, and we'll let you have a voice and a piece of it, but know that you want to have these youth do this. So that's where we are in Pueblo County. And I think, I think as the caseworkers who do this, as their supervisor, it's that passion that youth are important. We want to find homes for them. We know how important it is. We all know they went home anyway. When they turned 18 and they walked out our door, they found mom and dad. So let's just admit it, and let's help them do it. Let's be a part of it and encourage them. So is there anything else?
Well, thank you, Pueblo. We appreciate you sharing your lessons learned with us. And so our next presenter is Kay Yorty from State Judicial. Kay?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that. Some of you out there participating may not know it, but we're doing this webinar from different parts of the state. So I'm at a remote location, and I'm glad everything's working. I'm coming to you from the judicial branch here in Colorado. And before I begin my short presentation, I want to thank CDHS for inviting the courts to participate in this webinar. And I want to thank Pueblo especially for the good work you're doing down there. And I want to share with you that when I was growing up as a foster kid in the 60s, I'm sort of thinking I wish I would have been in Pueblo. It just sounds like you're doing wonderful, wonderful work. And I also want to thank the people out there in the county who are participating in this webinar. My message today is going to be sort of short, and I tried to select things that have to do with the courts and that are going on in the judicial district county relationship. And so my first slide is just a picture, and it says courts care about kids. And it has what I view as a traditional perception of courts. I mean, they're very formal. You see the scales of justice there, all of that, neutral conditions that courts have to maintain. And I think, especially I'm old enough to remember when courts may not have been very welcoming to families, and they were very intimidating. And so I want to say today that I think the courts are shifting, and the dependency and neglect courts are absolutely pace setters in this area in terms of cross-system collaboration and working with community stakeholders. And I want to go on to the next slide now. Okay, I'm sharing with you today, this is the location where I'm speaking to you from. It's a new judicial center in downtown Denver. I remember on the previous slide you saw that very formal presentation of the court. Well, this is the entrance to our judicial center, and instead of having that scale of justice, that very abstract concept, they've chosen to put a justice family outside of the Colorado courts. And I think that's a shift that's happening in the courts. And I'm very proud to say I'm very happy that they're family oriented. So we have here a mom justice, a dad justice, and then we have all of their kids that are part of the justice family. If you would go to the next slide. So what does this look like in your county? I mean, I'm here in Denver. I'm at the building where the Court of Appeals is and the Supreme Court. What does that have to do with you and the work you do in the county? Well, this is a justice family in your county. You have a dependency and neglect court that you're involved with in some of your child welfare cases. And so chances are you're going to go into a magistrate's court and you're going to have parents' counsel and child protection worker, all of that. So this is a human face, a very real human face of the justice family in your immediate area. If you go on to the next slide. So I'm talking about the community side of court, and I think just looking back on what Rapunzel and Kim said about changing culture, I mean, the fact that judges even want to be community leaders, I think, is a big change. And so the way that looks to you is the best practice court team in your area. And you heard Rapunzel and Kim both talk about the best practice court team in Pueblo. And we have 26 best practice court teams across the state. And they, some of the judicial districts, a lot of them have more than one county. And so some of the judicial districts have more than one best practice court team. And maybe those of you who are listening and wonder why there isn't a best practice court team in your county, I'm going to give you information later on that maybe you want to talk to the dean and judge about that if you want that cross-system collaboration. I mean, we have all of the stakeholders in these teams, and they're at the local level to talk about system change. So if you would go on further, please. So you may be wondering, you may already know, but would you like to have a list of the lead dependency and neglect judges? This is a judge like Judge Eiler is in the 10th Judicial District, which is Pueblo. She's a lead judge for the dependency and neglect best practice court team. Well, I provided a list of contact names to Dr. Ford. I think they're going to be able to share that with all of you if they haven't already. If you have an agenda item, you want to get on a best practice court team meeting, if you wonder why there isn't a best practice court team in your county, then look up your lead judge's name and contact information and contact that judge as a community leader. Not just as a judge you go before when you're sitting in court. And you can, that's okay, in that previous slide it also has my email address here at the state office, and I'm glad to provide you information about that also. So I know that my email address is Margaret, that I go by Kay, so you just have a weird practice in judicial where they put your first name and the email address. You know how formal courts are. So anyway, if you go on to the next slide. So who helps the courts, help the families? Well, that's the court improvement program that I work for, and it's housed in the judicial branch. Those of you who are listening may be interested to know that it's funded through the Children's Bureau. And so this is the feds providing money to every one of the states so we can work with our courts and all of the child welfare stakeholders to work on system change at the local level, at your court and at your child welfare department in your county. So we're a great support to those best practice court teams, technical support, consulting support, some kinds of monetary support. So if you would move on, please. Court improvement program, some of you may know us from the work we do with Summits on Children, Youth, and Families. Years ago they had the child welfare on the judicial side. We had our own conference, and then child welfare on your side had their own conference, and some smart person at some point said, well, let's put these conferences together because we're all stakeholders and we all deal with the same families. So that's why I put this poster up here. Some of you may know us from the work we do there. And those are training events that are planned and funded by the courts and by the child welfare system. If you would move on. So we know, most of you probably know by now that there isn't a summit on children, youth, and families in 2013. And I mean, we hope that we're going to look forward to more of those in the future. But the court side thought this kind of collaboration and these kinds of multidisciplinary teams, that we felt strongly enough about carrying on the tradition that we were willing to go it, on our own and fund it this year on our own. And hopefully we'll be able to work with CDHS next year. But we are having a statewide convening of best practice court teams in Keystone. Those lead judges that I talked about earlier have contacted your child welfare offices and have asked some of you to participate at this summit. We had to limit the team size, of course, because of monetary considerations. But I wanted to go back again to what Tim and Rapunzel were talking about. Each one of these 26 teams who are coming, about 1/3 of those teams are people from the local child welfare departments. So those people are going to come, and part of what we're going to do is have a fair where you share best practices. So you'll get the people who attend, and that convening will be able to bring home the best practices, like they mentioned that they're already doing in Pueblo, but there'll be some all over the state. So even though we weren't able to send all of the child welfare workers and all of the attorneys and judges to this convening, we do want to be able to share what we collect there. And I think from what we learned today, me hearing about what Pueblo is doing, knowing about those best practices, that helps me. I can take things from them and use it in the work that I do and share it with other people across the state. So next slide, please. We also do a multidisciplinary curricula. Notice how I keep saying multidisciplinary, and that's what I mean. It means everything we do is put together by a group of stakeholders, meaning the courts and child welfare and the foster parents and the youth and all of the other child welfare stakeholders. So this curricula that we put together and designed the curricula with the training academy, and we deliver it regionally with the training academy. We just completed a year of these trainings. And we're also going to deliver 6 of these trainings at the convening best practice court team. So if you would move on, please. If you want to look at this curricula, I don't know if you would, but we have it in its entirety, and all you have to do is go to the CIT website. You have the web address there, and click on training links. Some of you who are listening may be planning on, or may have been notified that you're going to the 2013 convening of best practice course. Well, you could go here to look at those trainings and look forward to seeing what you can expect from them. If you would move on, please. And that in your county, I've just given you a really broad overview of some of the things that are going on between the courts and the child welfare offices in the county, that you might have other ideas about other practices or other questions about court system change, or you may want to inform courts of the things that you're doing and they may not know already, because believe me, when you get in courts, and you all know this better than I, we've been training our judges to ask about family finding and to ask about paternity and to really inquire about why that OPLA goal is set. And, that's one of the purposes of the courts, is to ask questions. So if you have questions or if you have good ideas, ask your best practice court teams about them, because they're the people in your local area who know what's going on locally. And if you guys can get together and talk, I can guarantee you that changes can be made. Some of the things that are happening in some of the courts in Colorado is collaboration between courts and counties. There are benchmark hearings for transitioning youth. And so these are different than the usual child welfare hearings. They're more casual, they're set up, it's very one-on-one, it's very family-oriented, it's very youth-oriented. I know Denver does these and some of the other courts in Colorado, but you could ask your judge about that. Do we do them here? And You know, how are we collaborating as the Child Welfare Department? You may have heard about crossover youth initiatives. I mean, more and more we're looking at the juvenile offender world, and we're looking at the CNN court world and saying, you know, these are the same people. You know, what are we doing with these crossover youth? You can ask courts about the kids in court policy. We have the big initiatives in the courts to bring kids to court, and of course there's a legal requirement to try and do that also. So ask your own questions. You may be interested in some of these things, but ask your own questions and ask them locally. And then if you move on. So again, I want to thank you as part of the Justice family, and as I often do with child welfare stakeholders, I want to thank everyone, all of the people who presented and all the people who are listening. I want to thank you for the work you do to help kids and families. And when I emancipated out of the system in the 1960s, you know, I really wish I would have had folks like you. I think it would have been a lot easier. So thanks for the work you do every day. And that's it.
So thank you, Kay, for sharing with us the other side of our family, our courts family, and the work that they do to, on behalf of youth and their families that come through our system. And so in a minute, we're going to have a time for questions and answers. But I want to share with you our last person, last but not least.
Then I hate to interrupt, but as we discussed earlier, I have to leave this webinar because I actually have a meeting going on next door.
Okay, so does anyone have any questions for Kay so that she can go back to her meeting? I'm sorry. Thank you, Kay, for being my conscience.
And Sharon, if you could send that contact list for the lead judges to the folks who participated, I would appreciate it.
We can definitely do that. So are there any questions? Any questions for Kay?
And they can email me later, too, if they have questions.
Okay.
Okay, thank you all.
Thanks, Kay. And so our last presenter today is Tiffany Sewell. Tiffany is just joining us as our latest addition at the State Child Welfare. She is our newest PRT administrator here, and we're so pleased that through our blended funding and through the kindness of Boulder County that they were able to hire Tiffany, and then she is housed here at the state office to work with all of our jurisdictions around doing permanency roundtables. And so Tiffany, why don't you take it next?
So I know everybody keeps talking about permanency roundtables, and I want to just give you a little bit of a foundation of what that looks like. And if you kind of refer back to the slide that Mary talked about when she talked about the National Resource Center for Permanency and Family Connections and helping unpack the no, that's exactly what permanency roundtables do. Is its whole philosophy is that all children deserve permanency and that all children can have a permanent family. And the way that they do this and the purpose of this is to develop a permanent plan for every child that can realistically be implemented. Not just implemented by the caseworker, but implemented by all of the partners together to make this work. And if I encourage everybody to find out more information about this, because when you see the process, it is so enlightening, and I think anybody who's done permanency roundtables just comes away so excited and re-energized about the about being a caseworker, being an administrator, being part of child welfare. So it's just so exciting, the work that we're doing. So my whole job is to help you guys understand the values, get you started, find out anything you want to know about that. So I believe, let me give you my contact information, and I'll be happy to give you more information. This is, I think every child deserves permanency, and it's very urgent that we find that for those youth. So once again, you can reach me at 303-866-3930, and like I said, you know, my sole purpose is to get people started and make sure that we're finding permanency for every youth in our system.
Well, thank you, Tiffany. So we've come to the end of our time together for today's webinar. We really appreciate that you've spent part of your afternoon with us. Remember, our focus is on improving permanency outcomes for children and youth in out-of-home care for longer than 24 months. The state really appreciates that all the work that all of our county departments have been doing to achieve permanency for our kids, reunification at the foremost, placing kids with their relatives, looking at adoptions as an option, looking at the Relative Guardianship Assistance Program, and unfortunately for some of our kids who cannot go back home or have one of those other legal options, that we are working with them to help them age out of our system. And with every kid, we want to make sure that if that is the option that we have to use of aging out, that they don't age out alone. And so thank you so very much for your time this afternoon. If you have questions or comments, please don't hesitate to email any one of us. You have our email addresses and our phone numbers on the last page of the PowerPoint. So thank you very much for being here today. Have a great weekend, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye. Sharon?
Yes?
Sharon, this is Lori Rivera. Did you say you were going to email us the PowerPoint?
The PowerPoint was emailed earlier, but the updated one, yes, Lori.
Okay, thank you. And, oh, Sharon, there's 3 other people in the room with me. Can I just email you their names so that you know that they also attended?
Of course you can.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.